The smell of burning cotton and leather hit Lydia Kimball's nose before her mind could register what was happening, and by the time she ran from the boarding house where she worked, flames were already consuming the small shed behind her father's property, where she kept everything she owned in this world. She stood barefoot in the dirt street of Beaver, Utah, her nightgown fluttering in the hot July wind of 1881, watching orange flames lick the night sky while her father stood 15 feet away with an empty kerosene can dangling from his weathered hand. The look on his face was not rage or madness, but something far worse, a cold satisfaction that turned her blood to ice despite the heat rolling off the burning structure. "You are no daughter of mine," he said, his voice carrying across the crackling of the fire. "Not after you refused Samuel Pritchard's proposal. That man could have paid off every debt I owe, could have saved this family from ruin, but you were too selfish to see past your own foolish notions about love." Lydia felt her knees weaken, but refused to fall. Inside that shed were her mother's quilts, the only photographs she had of her family, before illness took her mother and 2 younger brothers 5 years ago, the dresses she had sewn with her own hands, her grandmother's Bible with 4 generations of family records written inside, the small savings she— "You are insane," she whispered, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "You burned my life because I would not marry a man 3 times my age who smells of whiskey and has buried 2 wives already under suspicious circumstances." Her father spat into the dust. "You will leave this town. You have until sunrise to be gone from Beaver, or I will tell everyone you are a thief who ran off with money from the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson will believe me. She always does, and you will hang for it." He walked away then, disappearing into the darkness toward the saloon where he spent most of his days drowning in cards and drink, leaving Lydia standing in her nightgown, watching everything she owned become smoke and ash. Neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the light and commotion, but no one moved to help her. Her father was known in this town, feared by some, pitied by others, and nobody wanted to cross him or get involved in family business. Lydia stood there until the flames died down to glowing embers, until the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn. She had no tears left. The shock had burned through her as thoroughly as the fire had burned her possessions, leaving only a strange, hollow clarity. She owned nothing now except the thin nightgown on her body, and she had perhaps 2 hours before her father would make good on his threat. She walked back to the boarding house on numb feet, hoping Mrs. Henderson had not woken yet. The older woman had been kind to Lydia in her own strict way, giving her work when she needed it most, but she would not harbor someone accused of theft. Could not afford to, even if she wanted to. Lydia slipped in through the kitchen door and found her work dress hanging on a peg where she had left it the evening before. It was plain brown cotton, worn thin at the elbows, but it was clothing. She changed quickly, her hands shaking now that the shock was beginning to crack, and she was just pinning up her long, dark hair when she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Lydia?" Mrs. Henderson appeared in the kitchen doorway, her gray hair in a long braid down her back, her face creased with concern. "I smelled smoke. What happened?" The story came out in broken pieces, and Lydia watched the older woman's face shift from concern to anger to resignation. When she finished, Mrs. Henderson sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs and pressed her hands to her face. "Your father came here last night, before the fire," she said finally. "He told me you had been stealing from the cash box, that I should check my records. I told him he was drunk and sent him away, but Lydia, if he makes this accusation public, even if we both know it is a lie, the shadow of it will follow you. This is a small town with a long memory." "I know," Lydia said. "I have to leave. Mrs." Henderson stood and went to a cupboard, pulling out a small cloth bag. She filled it with bread, dried meat, and a canteen of water, then pressed it into Lydia's hands along with $2 silver from her apron pocket. "It is not much, but it is what I can spare," she said. "Head south toward Milford. It is 20 miles, but there are ranches along the way, and perhaps you can find work. You are a hard worker, Lydia, and you deserve better than what your father has given you." Lydia embraced the woman, who had been more of a mother to her these past 3 years than her own father had been a parent, and then she walked out into the pale light of dawn with nothing but the dress on her back, a bag of food, and $2 silver to her name. The road south was dusty and already growing hot, though the sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains. Lydia walked with purpose, knowing she needed to put distance between herself and Beaver before the town fully woke. Her feet, still bare, were soon cut and bruised by the rocky road, but she pushed the pain aside and kept moving. She had walked perhaps 5 miles when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Terror seized her heart. Her father had changed his mind. Or perhaps he had rounded up some of his drinking companions to make good on his threats early. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the landscape offered little cover, just scrub brush and scattered juniper trees. The hoofbeats grew closer, and she turned to face whatever was coming, determined not to die running. But it was not her father. Instead, a man rode toward her on a dark bay horse, and even from a distance she could see he was not from Beaver. He wore the dust-stained clothes of someone who had been traveling hard, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dark trousers, and boots that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low against the morning sun, shadowing his face, and a bedroll and saddlebags were tied securely behind his saddle. He slowed as he approached, and Lydia could see his face now. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling gray-green, the color of sage after rain, and they took in her appearance with a quick assessment that felt more concerned than threatening. "Miss," he said, tipping his hat, "this is a lonely road to be walking alone, especially without shoes." His voice was low and steady, with an accent that suggested he had come from somewhere back east, though it had been softened by time spent in the territories. Lydia lifted her chin, unwilling to show weakness to a stranger, no matter how kind his tone. "I am managing well enough, thank you," she said. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her brave words to the exhaustion and fear beneath. He glanced back toward Beaver, then at the bag she carried, then at her bare feet again. "I do not mean to pry into your business, miss, but I passed through Beaver about an hour ago and saw the remains of a fire. Folks were talking about John Kimball's daughter running off in the night." He paused. "Would that be you?" Lydia's heart sank. The story was already spreading, which meant her father had likely already started spreading his version of events. She said nothing, but something in her face must have confirmed his guess. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and stood a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see he was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from hard physical work rather than bulk. His hands, she noticed, were calloused but clean, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that was somehow reassuring rather than threatening. "My name is Porter Whitman," he said. "I have been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana for the past 6 years, and I am on my way to a ranch outside Milford where I have taken a job as foreman. I do not know your situation, miss, and you do not have to tell me if you prefer not to, but if you are heading toward Milford, you are welcome to ride. It is a long walk, especially in this heat, and especially without proper footwear." Lydia wanted to refuse. She had been taught never to accept help from strange men, that doing so put her reputation at risk. But her reputation was already in tatters if her father had been talking, and her feet were bleeding, and the sun was growing hotter by the minute. More than that, there was something in Porter Whitman's eyes that made her think she could trust him, a straightforwardness that seemed at odds with the sort of man who would take advantage of a woman in distress. "My name is Lydia Kimball," she said finally. "And yes, I am heading toward Milford, though I have no specific destination beyond that." He nodded, as though this made perfect sense. "Well, Miss Kimball, why do not we get you out of this sun for starters?" He led his horse to a scrubby juniper that offered a small patch of shade and motioned for her to sit. From his saddlebag, he produced a spare pair of socks and a cloth, along with a canteen of water. He handed them to her without comment, then turned his back to give her privacy while she cleaned her feet and pulled on the socks. They were far too large, made for a man's feet rather than her own, but they were clean and soft and felt like a luxury after the rough road. "Thank you," she said when she had finished. He turned back and studied her feet critically. "Those socks will not last long without boots, but they will help for now. When we get to the ranch, I will see about getting you proper shoes." "I cannot accept charity," Lydia said quickly. "I have some money. I can pay." Porter's expression did not change. "We can discuss payment later. For now, let us get you to Milford before this heat gets any worse." He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. Lydia tensed at the proximity, very aware of his presence behind her, but he kept a respectful distance as much as was possible while sharing a horse, and his hands on the reins never strayed toward her. They rode in silence for a while, the horses' hooves making a steady rhythm on the packed dirt road. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, red rock cliffs rising in the distance, valleys of scrub and sage stretching out under the relentless blue sky. It was a land that demanded resilience, that gave nothing easily, and Lydia had always loved it despite its harshness. "You do not have to tell me what happened," Porter said after a time, his voice quiet enough that it did not feel like pressure. "But if you want to talk, I am willing to listen." Lydia found herself telling him, the words coming easier than she expected. She told him about her father's decline after her mother's death, how gambling and drink had consumed him until he was barely recognizable as the man who had once taught her to read and taken her fishing in the creek behind their house. She told him about Samuel Pritchard's proposal, about her refusal, about waking to find her shed burning and her father standing there with the kerosene can. She told him about the threat, about having to leave with nothing. Porter listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My father drank himself to death when I was 16, he said. "I understand how it changes a person, how the bottle takes them away piece by piece until there is nothing left of who they were. I am sorry you lost your father that way, and I am sorry he took your belongings out of spite. No one deserves that." There was a weight of understanding in his words that told Lydia he truly did comprehend what she had lost, not just the physical possessions, but the death of the father she had once known. It was a grief she had been carrying alone for years, and having someone acknowledge it made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "What will you do?" he asked. "In Milford, I mean." "Find work," Lydia said. "I am good with sewing and cooking, and I can keep house. Someone will need help, surely." "The ranch I am going to work for is owned by a family named Sullivan," Porter said. "Thomas Sullivan and his wife Rebecca have 5 children, and Rebecca has been complaining for months that she needs help around the house, especially with the cooking during cattle season when they have extra hands to feed. The pay would not be much, but it would include room and board, and the Sullivans are good people." Hope flickered in Lydia's chest. "Do you think they would consider hiring me?" "I think it is worth asking," Porter said. "I cannot promise anything, but I can introduce you and put in a good word." They reached Milford by early afternoon, a town slightly larger than Beaver, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. Porter stopped only long enough to purchase a pair of simple boots for Lydia, waving away her attempts to pay, and then they continued on toward the Sullivan Ranch, which lay another hour's ride to the west. The ranch, when they reached it, was more prosperous than Lydia had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built of stone and timber, with a wide porch and real glass windows. There were several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals with dozens of cattle, and fields of hay growing green in irrigated plots. It spoke of years of hard work and careful management, and Lydia felt her hope grow stronger. A woman emerged from the house as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with brown hair streaked with gray pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that was lined with work, but still pretty. Her eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the sight of Porter, returning with a young woman riding his horse. "Porter Whitman, you are a day early," she called, "and you have brought a guest." Porter dismounted and helped Lydia down, then turned to face the woman with a slight smile. "Mrs. Sullivan, I apologize for arriving ahead of schedule. The drive went faster than expected. This is Miss Lydia Kimball, and I am hoping you might have a moment to speak with her." Rebecca Sullivan's sharp eyes softened as they took in Lydia's appearance, the 2 large socks visible above her new boots, the single bag she carried, the exhaustion written on her face. "Come inside out of this heat, both of you. I have lemonade just made, and you look like you could use something cold to drink." The inside of the house was neat and comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful rag rugs on the wooden floors. Rebecca ushered them into the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive cast-iron stove and a long wooden table. She poured lemonade from a ceramic pitcher and set out a plate of cookies, then sat down and folded her hands expectantly. Porter explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out some of the more painful details, but making it clear that Lydia needed work and a safe place to stay. Rebecca listened carefully, her expression thoughtful, asking Lydia questions about her experience and skills. When the story was finished, Rebecca sat back in her chair and studied Lydia for a long moment, "I will be honest with you, Miss Kimball," she said. "I do need help, desperately. My oldest daughter, Emma, is 15 and helps as much as she can. But I have 4 other children, including twin boys who are 6 years old and more trouble than a barrel of wildcats. During cattle season, I am cooking 3 meals a day for anywhere from 8 to 15 men, plus doing all the regular household chores, and I am running myself ragged. But I need to know you are reliable, that you will not run off at the first sign of hard work or when some young cowboy turns your head." Lydia met her eyes steadily. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have lost everything I owned in this world in the past day. I have nowhere else to go and no one else to rely on. If you give me this opportunity, I will work harder than anyone you have ever employed, and I will not let you down. That is a promise." Rebecca's stern expression softened into something that might have been approval. "The pay is $20 a month, plus room and board. You will have a small room off the kitchen, your own space. I expect you to help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending, and whatever else needs doing around the house. The hours are long, especially during busy seasons, but I am fair, and I do not ask anything of my help that I would not do myself. If that suits you, the job is yours." Relief washed over Lydia so powerfully she felt dizzy. "It suits me very well, Mrs. Sullivan. Thank you." "Call me Rebecca," the older woman said, "and I will call you Lydia. We are not formal around here. Now, let me show you your room so you can settle in, and then you can help me start supper. We have 8 hungry men to feed tonight." The room Rebecca showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for clothes, and a window that looked out toward the western mountains. To Lydia, who had expected to be sleeping in a barn or under a bridge, it looked like a palace. She set down her small bag, sat on the bed, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She did not cry. There would be time for tears later, in private darkness. Instead, she washed her face in the basin, smoothed her hair, and went back to the kitchen to begin her new life. The work was indeed hard. That first evening alone, Lydia helped Rebecca prepare a supper of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, biscuits, and apple pie for 13 people. She met Thomas Sullivan, a weathered man with kind eyes and a firm handshake, and their children, Emma, who was quiet and watchful, 12-year-old Sarah with her gap-toothed grin, 10-year-old Michael, who was all knees and elbows, and the twin terrors Joseph and James, who lived up to their mother's description. She also met the ranch hands, 6 men of varying ages who were polite enough, but clearly curious about the new arrival. Porter ate with the hands that night, sitting at the far end of the long table, but Lydia felt his eyes on her several times during the meal. When she caught his gaze, he gave her a small nod that seemed to say she was doing well, and she felt an unexpected warmth at the encouragement. After supper came the washing up, an enormous task that left her hands red and wrinkled. Rebecca worked alongside her, chatting easily about the ranch and the family, and by the time Lydia finally made it to her small room, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with honest work. She fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow and did not dream. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Lydia woke before dawn to help Rebecca prepare breakfast for the family and hands. After breakfast came cleaning up, then laundry or mending or baking, then preparation for the midday meal. Afternoons might bring more cleaning, work in the vegetable garden, helping Emma with lessons, or keeping the twins from killing themselves or each other. Then came supper preparation, another enormous meal, more cleaning up, and finally a few precious hours of evening before exhaustion claimed her again. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the boarding house in Beaver, but Lydia found satisfaction in it. Rebecca was demanding but fair, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to offer praise when something was done well. The children warmed to her quickly, especially the twins, who seemed to have adopted her as a combination of playmate and jungle gym. Even Emma, who had been wary at first, began to seek her out for advice about sewing or to chat about the books she was reading. Porter, as foreman, spent his days working with the cattle and the men, but he took his meals at the main house with the other hands. Lydia found herself watching for him, noticing the way he moved with quiet competence, the way the other men respected him, despite his youth and newness to the ranch. He was patient with the horses, firm but fair with the men, and always had a kind word for the children when they came running to see the new calves or watch the branding. He was also, she noticed, unfailingly polite to her. He always thanked her for the meals, complimented her cooking, and asked how she was settling in. But there was something in the way he looked at her sometimes, a warmth in those gray-green eyes that made her pulse quicken in a way she had never experienced before. She told herself not to be foolish. Porter Whitman had helped her out of kindness, nothing more. He probably saw her as a charity case, someone to be pitied. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man who worked on the same ranch where she was barely beginning to rebuild her life. But telling herself not to feel something and actually managing it were two different things entirely. A week after her arrival, one of the horses threw a shoe, and Porter needed to take it into Milford to the blacksmith. Thomas had errands that needed running as well, and Rebecca asked Lydia to go along to pick up supplies from the general store. "Porter will keep you safe," Rebecca said, apparently oblivious to the way Lydia's heart leapt at the prospect. "And it will do you good to get away from the kitchen for a few hours." They left mid-morning, Porter leading the limping horse while Lydia rode beside him on a gentle mare named Daisy that Rebecca assured her was foolproof. The day was hot, but not unbearable, and the ride was pleasant. They talked easily now, the initial awkwardness of strangers long past. Porter told her about the cattle drives he had worked, about seeing the Great Plains and the mountains of Montana, about nights sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled milk across the sky. Lydia found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone, about her dreams of someday having her own home, about how much she missed her mother and brothers, about the way reading had been her escape when her father's drinking became too much to bear. Porter listened with the same focused attention he had shown on the road from Beaver, and she realized that this quality, this ability to make someone feel truly heard, was rare and precious. They completed their errands in Milford, Porter waiting patiently while the blacksmith worked and Lydia selected supplies from the general store. She was just loading the last bag onto the pack horse when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, if it is not the thief herself, bold as brass in broad daylight. She turned slowly to find Samuel Pritchard standing behind her, his considerable bulk blocking the sun. He was even more unpleasant than she remembered, his face flushed red from drink despite the early hour, his clothes stained and his breath reeking of whiskey. "Mr. Pritchard," she said, keeping her voice level with effort, "I am not a thief, and you know it." "That is not what your father says," Pritchard replied, moving closer. "He says you stole money from the boarding house before you ran off like a coward in the night. Seems to me a woman like that owes certain folks an apology, maybe some compensation for the trouble she has caused." His hand reached out to grab her arm, but before he could make contact, Porter stepped between them. He moved so quickly and smoothly that Lydia barely saw him coming, and suddenly he was standing between her and Pritchard, his posture deceptively relaxed, but radiating a quiet threat that made Pritchard take an involuntary step backward. "The lady does not owe you anything," Porter said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "and you are not going to touch her." Pritchard tried to puff himself up. "Who the hell are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? This does not concern you, Cowboy." "It concerns me because Miss Kimball is under the protection of the Sullivan Ranch," Porter replied, "and because I do not take kindly to seeing men harass women in the street. Now, I am going to ask you politely to step aside and let us be on our way. I would hate for this to become unpleasant." There was something in Porter's tone and stance that suggested he knew exactly how to make things unpleasant if necessary, and whatever Pritchard saw in his eyes made the older man back down. He spat on the ground near Porter's boots, a gesture of impotent anger, and then turned and walked away, muttering curses under his breath. Lydia realized she was shaking. Porter turned to her immediately, his expression shifting from hard to concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Porter guided her to sit on the edge of the general store porch, then crouched down in front of her so they were at eye level. "He is not going to hurt you," he said firmly. "Not while I am around, and not while you are working for the Sullivans. Thomas has standing in this county, and his word means something. If Pritchard or your father try to spread lies about you, Rebecca and Thomas will set people straight." "You do not know my father," Lydia said, her voice coming out more bitter than she intended. "He is convincing when he wants to be, and people believe him." "Maybe so," Porter said. "But you have friends now, Lydia. You are not alone anymore." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, made her throat tighten with emotion. She met his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there, and something else, something warm and protective that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me on that road." Porter's expression softened. "I am glad I was there," he said, "and I am glad you took a chance on accepting help from a stranger." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them. Lydia could not name it exactly, but she felt it in the way Porter stayed close to her side, in the way he helped her down from Daisy with hands that lingered just a moment longer than necessary, in the way his eyes followed her as she carried supplies into the house. That evening after supper, when Lydia went out to the porch to escape the heat of the kitchen, she found Porter sitting on the steps, looking out at the sunset, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. He glanced up as she approached and smiled, patting the step beside him in the invitation. "Beautiful evening," he said as she sat down, careful to keep a proper distance between them. "It is," she agreed. "I have always loved the sunsets here. They make up for the harshness of everything else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors deepen and shift. Finally, Porter spoke. "I want you to know that I was not exaggerating earlier," he said. "About you having friends here, I mean. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I hope you consider me among them." Lydia looked at him, at the honesty in his face, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "I do," she said softly. "You have been kinder to me than almost anyone in my life, Porter. I do not know how to repay that." "You do not need to repay it," he said. "Kindness should not be a debt, but if you want to repay it anyway, just keep being who you are. Keep working hard and making the children laugh, and baking those biscuits that Thomas says are better than Rebecca's, though you did not hear that from me." Lydia laughed, surprised by the sudden lightness in her chest. "Your secret is safe." Porter's expression grew more serious. "I mean it, Lydia. You have been through something terrible, but you have not let it break you. You have not become bitter or given up. That takes strength, more than you probably realize." His words touched something deep inside her, a part that had been braced for judgment and pity, but instead found respect and admiration. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the step between them. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me that way." Porter turned his hand over so their palms touched, his fingers curling gently around hers. The touch sent electricity through her entire body, and when she met his eyes, she saw her own feelings reflected there, that same mixture of surprise and recognition and possibility. "Lydia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I hope I am not speaking out of turn, but I need you to know that my interest in your welfare is not purely based on friendship or charity. From the moment I saw you on that road, something in me recognized something in you, and every day since has only made that feeling stronger." Her breath caught. "Porter, I do not want you to feel obligated because you helped me. You do not owe me anything, certainly not courtship or promises." "This has nothing to do with obligation," he said, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "This is about the fact that I think about you constantly, that hearing you laugh makes my whole day better, that I have started looking for excuses to come to the main house outside of meal times just to see you, that I am falling in love with you, Lydia Kimball. And I am fairly certain it started the moment you lifted your chin on that dusty road and told me you were managing well enough on your own." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I thought I was imagining it," she whispered, "the way you looked at me sometimes. I told myself not to hope, because hoping seemed too dangerous." "Hope is not dangerous," Porter said, "at least not when it is placed in something real. And this is real, Lydia. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She thought about the life she had lost in Beaver, about her father destroying everything she owned in a fit of spite, about walking down that road with nothing but the clothes on her back and $2 silver. She thought about how Porter had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak, about his steady kindness and quiet strength, about the way he made her feel safe and seen and valued. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, the words feeling like both a confession and a liberation. "I have been trying not to, but I do not think I have a choice anymore." Porter's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. then we will fall together," he said. "And I promise you, Lydia, I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice in trusting me." They sat on those porch steps until full darkness fell and stars emerged like diamonds scattered across black velvet, talking about everything and nothing, their hands intertwined, the future spreading out before them like the wide open land that surrounded the ranch. The courtship that followed was conducted under the watchful but approving eyes of the Sullivan family. Rebecca, who missed nothing that happened in her household, noticed the change immediately and cornered Lydia the next morning while they were kneading bread. "Porter Whitman is a good man," she said without preamble. "Thomas speaks very highly of him, says he has the best instincts with cattle and horses that he has seen in years. But more than that, he is honest and hard-working and treats people with respect. If he is courting you, you could do far worse." Lydia felt her cheeks heat. "It is that obvious?" Rebecca laughed. "My dear girl, he looks at you like you hung the moon, and you watch the door every time someone comes into the kitchen hoping it is him. Yes, it is that obvious, but it is also sweet, and I for one approve. Just remember that you both work for this ranch, and I expect you to maintain propriety until there is a ring on your finger." "Yes, madam," Lydia said, trying not to smile at Rebecca's practical romanticism. Thomas gave his blessing as well, pulling Porter aside one evening and having a quiet conversation that ended with a handshake and a clap on the shoulder. The children were delighted, especially the twins, who immediately began asking when the wedding would be and whether there would be cake. "Slow down," Lydia told them, laughing. "We have only just started courting. Weddings are a long way off." But even as she said it, she felt the rightness of the idea settling into her bones. This was what she had refused Samuel Pritchard for, this feeling of rightness and choice and genuine affection. This was worth losing everything. Porter courted her with a combination of old-fashioned propriety and genuine thoughtfulness. He brought her wildflowers from the range, took her on supervised rides to see the most beautiful parts of the ranch, taught her to ride better so she felt confident on horseback. He talked to her about his dreams of someday having his own small ranch, nothing grand but enough to raise cattle and horses and maybe a family. He listened when she talked about her fears and grief, never dismissing her feelings or trying to rush her past them. One evening, about a month after they had declared their feelings, Porter asked her to take a walk with him after supper. They strolled toward the creek that marked the southern boundary of the Sullivan property, the air finally cooling after another scorching day. When they reached a large cottonwood tree by the water, Porter stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know I said I would not rush this," he began, "and I meant it. But Lydia, I am 30 years old, and I have spent the past 6 years drifting from job to job, never putting down roots because nothing ever felt right. Until now. Until you." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Porter, let me finish," he said gently. "I do not have much to offer you yet. I have saved most of my pay over the years, enough to make a down payment on some land, but it would be a hard life at first. We would have to build everything from nothing, and it would take years of work before we had anything resembling comfort. But I swear to you, Lydia, I would work my fingers to the bone to give you the life you deserve, to build you a home that no one can ever take away from you." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. "My father burned everything I owned," she said. "But Porter, those were just things. What you are offering me is so much more than things. You are offering me a partner, a home built on choice and love rather than obligation and fear. That is everything I have ever wanted." Porter reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, she saw a simple gold band with a single small diamond, modest but beautiful. "It was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me before she passed away 3 years ago, told me to give it to someone worthy when I found her. Lydia Kimball, you are the worthiest person I have ever known. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, the word coming out on a sob of joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Lydia looked down at the ring on her hand and felt something she had not experienced since the night of the fire, complete happiness untainted by fear or grief. "When?" she asked. "When should we marry?" Porter considered. "The preacher comes through Milford once a month. He will be back in 2 weeks. That would give you time to make a dress if you want, and for me to talk to Thomas about my plans. I want to leave here on good terms and with his blessing. 2 weeks, Lydia repeated, testing the words. It seemed impossibly soon and impossibly far away at the same time. Yes, 2 weeks. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they announced their engagement, the household erupted in celebration. Rebecca immediately began planning, enlisting Emma and Sarah to help make Lydia a proper wedding dress. Thomas shook Porter's hand and offered to host the wedding at the ranch to provide a feast for the occasion. The twins ran around whooping with excitement until their father finally corralled them and sent them to bed. That night, lying in her small room off the kitchen, Lydia looked at the ring on her finger and thought about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had lost everything and found everything. She had been destroyed and rebuilt. And soon, she would marry a man who had quite literally picked her up off the road and helped her become whole again. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca and Emma worked on the dress, creating a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Sarah and Lydia made bouquets of wildflowers and baked enough cake to feed the entire county. The ranch hands built a temporary arbor by the creek, decorating it with ribbons and more flowers. Thomas rode into Milford to confirm the preacher's visit and invite a few neighboring families to join the celebration. Porter spent his days working as usual, but his evenings were devoted to planning their future. He had found a piece of land for sale about 10 miles from the Sullivan Ranch, 200 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing land. The price was reasonable, and with his savings plus a small loan from Thomas, who offered it freely, Porter could afford it. There were no buildings on the property yet, but there was timber in the nearby mountains and plenty of stone for building. They would live in a tent at first while they built a cabin. Rough conditions, but temporary. "Are you sure about this?" Porter asked Lydia one evening as they sat making plans. "It really will be a hard life, at least for the first few years. Nothing like the comfort you have here with the Sullivans." Lydia took his hand. "Porter, I have lost everything once already, and I survived. I know I can handle hard work and rough conditions. What I could not handle is a life without choice, without love, without hope. You are giving me all three. That is worth more than any comfort." His eyes shone with emotion. "I am going to make you so happy, Lydia. That is a promise." "You already do," she said simply. The wedding day dawned clear and hot, as most July days did in Utah territory. Lydia woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Rebecca brought her breakfast in bed, an unprecedented luxury, and then helped her bathe and dress. The gown fit perfectly, the white fabric making her skin glow and her dark hair look even richer. Emma braided flowers into her hair, and Sarah declared she looked like a princess. The ceremony was held at mid-morning by the creek, under the arbor the ranch hands had built. The preacher was a kind-faced older man who had made the circuit through this territory for 20 years. About 30 people attended, a mixture of Sullivan family, ranch hands, and neighboring families who had come to know Lydia over the past 2 months. When Lydia walked down the makeshift aisle on Thomas Sullivan's arm, since she had no father to give her away, and Thomas had offered, she saw Porter waiting for her under the arbor and felt her heart swell with love. He was dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of wonder and devotion that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the trials life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Porter kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the women sigh audibly. And just like that, Lydia Kimball became Lydia Whitman, beginning a new chapter with a new name and a new life. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud. Rebecca had prepared a feast including roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and a towering wedding cake that had taken Lydia and Sarah 2 days to make. There was music and dancing, and even Lydia, who had never been much of a dancer, found herself swept into Porter's arms and spun around until she was laughing and breathless. As the sun set and guests began to depart, Rebecca pulled Lydia aside. "You have been like a daughter to me these past months," she said, her eyes damp. "I know you will be nearby, but I'm going to miss having you in my kitchen every day." Lydia embraced her, this woman who had given her work and shelter and kindness when she needed it most. "You saved my life," she whispered. "I will never forget that." "You saved yourself," Rebecca corrected. "You just needed a little help along the way. Now go, Be happy with that good man of yours." Porter had borrowed a wagon from Thomas, loaded with supplies and wedding gifts from the various guests. They would drive to their land that evening and camp there, beginning their new life together under the stars. As they rode away from the Sullivan Ranch, Lydia looked back once at the house that had been her refuge, then turned forward to face the future with her husband beside her. Their land was beautiful in the twilight, the creek gurgling softly and cottonwoods rustling in the evening breeze. Porter had already set up a large canvas tent and built a fire ring during a previous visit. He helped Lydia down from the wagon, and for a moment they just stood together, looking at the raw land that would become their home. "This is where we will build the house," Porter said, pointing to a slight rise that would give them a view of the creek and the mountains beyond. "And over there, the barn. We will start with just a few cattle, build the herd slowly. Plant a garden closer to the creek where the irrigation will be easier. In 5 years, maybe 10, this will be a real ranch." Lydia leaned against him, his arm coming around her waist. "In 5 years or 10, it will be our home," she said. "That is all that matters." They spent their wedding night in the tent under blankets Porter had brought, talking and laughing and learning each other in the intimate ways of marriage. It was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward, as first times often are, but it was theirs, chosen freely by two people who loved each other. And when Lydia fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt a peace and contentment she had not experienced since before her mother died. The weeks and months that followed were indeed hard work, but they were also filled with joy. Porter and Lydia worked side by side, building their cabin, cutting timber, hauling stone, learning through trial and error how to fit logs and chink walls. Some days they worked until they could barely move, collapsing into their tent too exhausted even to talk. Other days they took breaks to swim in the creek, or ride out to explore their land, or simply sit together and dream about the future. Thomas sent over ranch hands occasionally to help with the heavier work, and Rebecca visited with food and encouragement. Neighboring families stopped by to introduce themselves and offer assistance. Slowly, Lydia and Porter became part of the community, no longer newcomers, but valued members of the fabric of this harsh but beautiful land. By the time fall arrived, painting the cottonwoods gold, they had a small but solid cabin with a stone fireplace, 2 rooms with the promise of more to come, and real glass windows that Porter had saved for months to afford. They had 4 head of cattle, the beginning of their herd, and 3 horses including Daisy, whom Rebecca had given them as a wedding gift. They had chickens scratching in a coop Porter built, and a vegetable garden that had produced enough to can for winter. More than that, they had each other. They had love and partnership and a future built on their own terms. One evening in late September, Lydia stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed since that terrible night in Beaver. She heard Porter's footsteps behind her and leaned back into him when his arms came around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on the top of her head. "About fire," she said. "About how my father burned everything I owned because he wanted to destroy me. About how instead he freed me. If he had not done that, I would never have left Beaver, never met you, never had this life." Porter's arms tightened around her. "I am sorry for what he did to you, but I am grateful for where it led." "So am I," Lydia said. "But I was also thinking about how you built me a new life from those ashes. You took someone who had nothing and made her feel rich beyond measure. We built it together," Porter corrected gently. "Every log in these walls, every fence post in that corral, every plan and dream we have made, we have done it together. That is what marriage is, Lydia. Building something new together from whatever materials life gives you." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you so much, Porter Whitman. More than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I am going to keep loving you and building this life with you for the next 50 years if we are blessed with that much time." "Only 50?" she teased. He laughed. "All right, 60, 70. However many years God grants us, I will spend every single one of them loving you." They went inside as darkness fell, to the home they had built with their own hands, and Lydia thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How the worst night of her life had led directly to the best days. How losing everything had taught her to appreciate the few truly important things: love, partnership, freedom, choice. Her father had tried to destroy her, but instead, he had set her free. And Porter had caught her, had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, had loved her not in spite of her broken state, but because of the strength it had revealed in her. As she fell asleep that night in the cabin they had built together, Lydia Whitman felt grateful for every hard step that had brought her to this moment, this life, this love. The winter that followed was harsh, testing their preparations and their resolve. Snow fell heavy in the mountains and drifted deep around their cabin. There were days when they could not leave the house, when they huddled close to the fireplace and rationed their supplies carefully. But they had prepared well, and they never went hungry or cold. And there was something oddly cozy about being snowed in together, about having nothing to do but talk and read and plan for spring. Porter taught Lydia to play chess using a set carved from wood, and she proved a quick study, soon winning as many games as she lost. She taught him songs her mother had sung, and his deep voice blending with her lighter, one filled the cabin with music. They read books borrowed from Rebecca and discussed them for hours. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies and desires with increasing confidence and pleasure. It was during one of these snowbound evenings in early January that Lydia realized she had not had her monthly courses since before the wedding. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another month passed with the same absence plus a persistent nausea in the mornings, she knew. She told Porter one evening after supper, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. His expression went through shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally pure joy in the space of about 3 seconds. Then he was gathering her into his arms, holding her gently as though she might break, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby. Lydia, you have made me the happiest man alive." "Are you ready to be a father?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "I do not know if anyone is ever truly ready," Porter said honestly. "But I am ready to try, and I am ready to do it with you. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." They told Rebecca and Thomas the next time they visited the Sullivan Ranch, and Rebecca immediately began planning, declaring that Lydia would come stay at the ranch for the final month before the birth, and for several weeks after, so she would have help and experienced guidance. Porter looked like he wanted to protest, but recognized the wisdom in the arrangement. Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and revealing the promise of new life. Lydia's belly grew round, and Porter became increasingly protective, refusing to let her do any heavy work and watching her constantly for signs of distress. She found it alternately endearing and exasperating, but mostly she was touched by how seriously he took his impending fatherhood. They spent the spring and early summer preparing for the baby, building a cradle from smoothed wood, sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric Rebecca provided, preparing a corner of their bedroom as a nursery. They also continued working the ranch, building their herd by careful breeding and purchase, planting a larger garden, making improvements to the cabin and outbuildings. Their neighbors had become genuine friends by now, stopping by regularly to help with projects or just to visit. The community had accepted them fully, and Lydia found herself part of a network of women who supported each other through the challenges of frontier life. When one family lost a barn to fire, everyone came together to help rebuild. When another family's matriarch fell ill, the women took turns caring for her and managing her household. It was this spirit of mutual support that made the harsh land livable, and Lydia was grateful to be part of it. In late August, when the summer heat was at its peak and Lydia felt like she might burst from the size of her belly, she moved to the Sullivan Ranch as planned. Porter came with her, camping near the main house so he could be close by. Rebecca took one look at Lydia and predicted the baby would come within the week. She was right. 3 days later, Lydia's labor began in the early morning hours. Rebecca and 2 other experienced women from neighboring ranches attended her, while Porter paced outside like a caged animal, driving Thomas and the ranch hands crazy with his nervous energy. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 15 hours. There were moments when Lydia thought she could not endure another minute, when the pain seemed too great to bear. But Rebecca held her hand and coached her through each contraction, and the other women offered encouragement and practical help. And somehow she found the strength to keep going. Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Lydia pushed one final time and felt her baby slip into the world. There was a moment of terrifying silence, and then a loud, angry wail filled the room, and Lydia collapsed back against the pillows, laughing and crying at the same time. "You have a son," Rebecca said, placing the cleaned and wrapped baby in Lydia's arms. A big, healthy, loud son. Lydia looked down at the tiny red face, the searching eyes, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt love crash over her with the force of a physical blow. This was her son, hers and Porter's, a living symbol of their love and their future. "Bring Porter in," she said. "He needs to meet his son." Porter came in looking pale and terrified, but the moment he saw Lydia holding the baby, his face transformed. He knelt beside the bed and stared at their son with an expression of such awe and wonder that Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks again. "He is perfect," Porter whispered. "Lydia, he is absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" she asked. Porter took the baby with trembling hands, cradling him carefully against his chest. The baby squirmed and made small mewling sounds, and Porter started to cry, tears running unashamedly down his face. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father, and I promise you I am going to do my best to be a good one. I am going to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are going to have a good life, son, a free life, a life where you can choose your own path. That is my promise to you." They named him Peter, after Porter's father, with a middle name of Thomas in honor of Thomas Sullivan, who had given them so much help and support. Peter Whitman came home to his parents' ranch at 3 weeks old, a thriving, healthy baby, with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-green eyes. The years that followed were full of challenges and triumphs. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, the herd increasing, the land yielding its bounty with hard work and careful management. Porter proved as skilled at ranching as he had been at being a trail hand, with an intuition about cattle and horses that bordered on uncanny. Lydia managed the household and the garden, raised chickens and preserved food, and slowly built up a reputation for the best baked goods in the county. Peter grew from a baby to a toddler to a young boy, full of energy and curiosity, adored by both his parents. When he was 3, Lydia gave birth to a daughter, Grace, who had her father's quiet steadiness even as an infant. 2 years later came another son, Matthew, who was all mischief and laughter from the moment he learned to smile. Through it all, Lydia and Porter's love remained the foundation of their life. They still had their evening talks, still found time to sit together and watch the sunset, still surprised each other with small gestures of affection and care. They weathered droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, the normal challenges of frontier life, but they weathered them together. One evening when Peter was 7 and chattering excitedly about the horse Porter had promised to teach him to train, Lydia found herself standing in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching her husband and children together and thinking about the long journey that had brought her here. She thought about the night she stood in Beaver, watching her possessions burn, about the cold satisfaction on her father's face as he destroyed everything she owned. She had not heard from him in the 8 years since, had no idea if he was even still alive. For a long time, she had carried anger about what he had done, had woken sometimes in the night, reliving that terrible helplessness. But standing here now, watching her husband lift their youngest son onto his shoulders while their daughter brought them drawings she had made, Lydia found that the anger had burned away like morning mist in sunlight. Her father had tried to destroy her, but he had failed. She had risen from those ashes and built a life far better than anything he could have given her through an arranged marriage to a man like Samuel Pritchard. Porter glanced up and caught her watching them. "Come join us," he called. "Peter wants to show you the rabbit tracks he found by the creek." Lydia walked across the room, into the circle of her family, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was her life now. This was what she had built from nothing but determination and hope and the love of a good man who had seen her worth when she had nothing left. "I love you," she said to Porter, loud enough for their children to hear. She had learned that love should be spoken aloud and often, that nothing should be left unsaid or taken for granted. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close with one arm while balancing Matthew on his shoulders with the other. "Every single day, I love you more." The children made gagging noises, declaring that their parents were being mushy again, and everyone dissolved into laughter. And that evening, as Lydia tucked her children into their beds and kissed their foreheads, as she climbed into bed beside her husband and felt his arms come around her in the darkness, she sent a silent thank you into the universe for the fire that had burned away her old life and made room for this new one. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. The ranch prospered enough that they were able to hire help during cattle season, easing the constant burden of work. Peter grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Grace became known for her skill with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish mare. Matthew's mischievous nature was tempered by a kind heart that made him everyone's favorite. When Peter was 15, a man came to the ranch asking for Lydia. She did not recognize him at first, this thin, aged man with trembling hands. But when he spoke her name, she knew her father's voice. Porter was working in the far pasture, and Lydia was grateful for his absence. She stepped out onto the porch but did not invite her father inside. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice level despite the hammering of her heart. John Kimball looked at her for a long moment, taking in her neat dress, the prosperous ranch behind her, the evidence of a good life well lived. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I am dying," he said bluntly. "The doctor says I have maybe a month, maybe less. I came to ask your forgiveness, if you have any to give." Lydia studied her father, this man who had given her life and then tried to destroy it. She saw the ravages of years of drink in his face, the tremor in his hands, the genuine regret in his eyes. She thought about holding on to anger, about sending him away without forgiveness, about making him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused her. But then she thought about her children, about the life she had built, about how anger was a poison that hurt the one who carried it more than anyone else. "I do not forgive you for what you did," she said quietly. "What you did was cruel and unforgivable, but I am grateful for where it led me, and I will not carry hatred for you anymore. It is too heavy a burden, and I have better things to fill my heart with." Her father nodded, tears running down his weathered face. "You are stronger than I ever was, Lydia. Your mother would be so proud of you." He left then, walking slowly back down the road he had come, and Lydia never saw him again. She learned a month later that he had died in Beaver, and she felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness at the news. She grieved not for what she had lost, but for what she had never really had, a father who could love her enough to put her happiness above his own needs. Porter held her while she cried, and did not try to make it better with platitudes. He just let her feel what she needed to feel, and then when the tears were done, he reminded her of who she was now, of the life they had built together, of the love that surrounded her. The children grew and eventually began making their own lives. Peter married a neighboring rancher's daughter and took over more of the ranch's daily operations, building a house on the north edge of the property where he could start his own family. Grace surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, moving into Milford during the school year and coming home to the ranch for summers. Matthew talked about seeing more of the world, about traveling to California or maybe back east, but he always returned to the ranch, unable to stay away from the land he loved. When Lydia was 45, she became a grandmother for the first time when Peter and his wife had a daughter they named Lydia Rose. Holding that tiny baby and seeing her son's face mirror the same wonder Porter had shown when Peter was born, Lydia felt the circle of life complete itself in a satisfying way. She and Porter aged together, their hair going gray, their faces lining with years of sun and wind and laughter. But their love, if anything, grew deeper with time. They still found excuses to touch in passing, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other sometimes and marveled at the life they had created together. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, sitting on the porch of the expanded house watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Lydia turned to Porter. "Do you remember the day you found me on that road?" she asked. "Walking barefoot toward Milford with nothing but a bag of food and $2 silver?" Porter smiled. "I remember thinking you were the most determined-looking person I had ever seen. All defiance and dignity, despite having lost everything. I remember knowing in that moment that you were someone special. I remember being terrified but trying not to show it," Lydia said. "I remember thinking I would probably die on that road or end up destitute, that my father had finally won. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer. We saved each other, I think," Porter said. "I was drifting before I met you, never putting down roots because nothing felt right. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder. You built me a new life from the ashes of the old one. You gave me everything I had lost and so much more. How do I even begin to thank you for that? Porter kissed the top of her head. You already have. Every single day we have spent together, every child we have raised, every challenge we have faced side by side, that has been my thanks. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Lydia Whitman. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, just as it had on their wedding day all those years ago. Their grandchildren's laughter filled the air, and smoke rose from the chimney of Peter's house across the way, and the cattle lowed in the distance, and everything was peaceful and right. Lydia thought about that night in Beaver one more time, about the flames and the smell of burning cotton and her father's cold satisfaction. She thought about how that fire had burned away her old life, but it also forged her into someone stronger, someone capable of building something beautiful from ruins. Her father had tried to destroy her by burning everything she owned, but Porter had built her a new life from the ashes. Together, they had created something that no fire could ever touch, a love and a family and a home that would outlast them both and continue on through their children and their children's children. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Lydia Whitman held her husband's hand and felt grateful for every step that had brought her to this moment, this life, this love. The fire had not destroyed her. Instead, it had set her free to find the life she was always meant to have, and the man she was always meant to love. And that, she thought, was its own kind of miracle.